Hello and welcome back to Radio 2, and this is the second lecture out of three in which we will be talking about interviews. So if you want to go to your book, it's on page 179 of Beyond Powerful Radio. Okay, so as we are talking about interviews, there's a brief clip I quickly want to show you with regards to controversial interviews.
These interviews waded into contentious waters and divided viewers. Welcome to WatchMojo.com. Number 9, Sarah Palin and Katie Couric.
But he still has a stake in the company, so isn't that a conflict of interest?
It was hard not to cringe during this train wreck of an interview with CBS Evening News anchor Katie Couric. If 2008 vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin had expected Couric to go easy, she and the viewing public soon learned otherwise.
Newspapers and magazines, did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
Like what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
All of them.
Broadcast over several segments, Couric's questions were direct, and Palin's answers were, well, less so. Palin's insistence that she had foreign policy experience because Russia is right next door to Alaska didn't exactly help.
Alaska has a very narrow maritime border between a foreign country, Russia, and on our other side, the land boundary that we have with Canada.
Palin came off looking unnerved and ill-informed, which she later blamed on Couric.
I did feel that there were a lot of things that she was missing in terms of an opportunity to ask what a VP candidate stands for.
Number 8, Monica Lewinsky and Barbara Walters.
I don't think that my relationship hurt the job he was doing. It didn't hurt the work I was doing.
It wasn't the first time Barbara Walters had a woman spill the beans on her lover, but few interviews have been as anticipated as her 1999 sit-down with Monica Lewinsky, the month after Bill Clinton was acquitted of perjury and obstruction of justice.
I wouldn't dream of asking Chelsea and Mrs. Clinton to forgive me, but I would ask them to know that I am very sorry for what happened and for what they've been through.
The former White House intern apologized to Clinton's wife and daughter and said the president was a, quote, good kisser.
And he kissed you? Yes. What'd you think? He's a good kisser.
Millions of viewers watched as Walters grilled Lewinsky on her affairs with married men, only to reveal her own in an autobiography years later. Number 5, Lance Armstrong and Oprah Winfrey.
Those are my words.
For almost 2 decades, he was a hero for many. And for some, Lance Armstrong is still remembered for his dramatic comeback from cancer in the late 90s.
I've said it for years. I've said it for longer than 7 years. I have never doped.
But in 2012, the disgraced cyclist was banned from competition and stripped of all 7 Tour de France titles for using performance-enhancing drugs.
Yes or no? Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes.
His tense interview with Oprah marked his first public admission, confirming what many had long suspected. Doping in the sport was widespread, and Armstrong had been using banned substances since early in his career.
Was it humanly possible to win the Tour de France without doping 7 times in a row?
Not in my opinion.
Number 4, Megyn Kelly and Alex Jones.
So again.
But you're trying to have it always, right?
No, I'm not.
Incendiary shock jock Alex Jones thrives on provocation. He's infamous for claiming the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre was all a hoax, and for going bananas in interviews.
For wanting to get rid of
It's to point out you're a foreigner, a red coat, here telling us what to do.
Whatever.
Go back to where they took the guns if you don't like it.
So when Megyn Kelly interviewed Jones for NBC in 2017, the network was criticized for airing his views at all.
But here's the thing. Alex Jones isn't going away.
Kelly countered that his opinions have to be addressed and pressed Jones hard as the conspiracy theorists scramble to cover all bases.
But Alex, the parents, one after the other, devastated. The dead bodies that the coroner autopsy.
And they blocked all that. They won't release any of it. That's unprecedented.
Nonetheless, the backlash continued when Jones released tapes of Kelly promising to show viewers, quote, the dad in him. And Rolling Stone magazine brought up the ghost of Kelly's Fox News past to suggest she had helped foster the culture that made Jones popular.
All I can do is give you my word and tell you, if there's one thing about me, I do what I say I'm going to do.
Number 3, Sean Penn and El Chapo.
Quiero dejar en claro el contenido de esta entrevista es exclusivo para la señorita Kay del Castillo y el señor Sean Penn.
Joaquin El Chapo Guzman had the dubious honor of being the most powerful drug lord in the world. The head of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel was a wanted fugitive when actor Sean Penn interviewed him for Rolling Stone in 2015. Penn's in was actress Kate del Castillo, who El Chapo had invited to meet him. El Chapo boasted that he trafficked more drugs than anyone else in the world, but reactions focused on the ethical and legal issues of the interview. Seems the magazine didn't inform the authorities and promised the drug baron editorial control. In the end, El Chapo must regret the meeting most. It inadvertently helped police locate him anyway, leading to his latest arrest.
Es cierto que el consumo día con día es más grande y más grande, entonces ahí vente y ahí vente.
Number 2, David Frost and Richard Nixon.
That's your conclusion. It is. But now let's look at the facts.
Nixon's name has become synonymous with political scandal, which wasn't the personal legacy the disgraced ex-president had in mind for himself. But through his interviews with Robert Frost, Nixon hoped to restore his image and mitigate the political fallout of Watergate.
Do you feel that you ever obstructed justice or were part of a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
Arguably, Nixon got the best of early one-on-ones, but then Frost pulled out his secret weapon, a transcript of a damning conversation between Nixon and aide Charles Colson, proving Nixon's knowledge of the cover-up.
Now, somewhere you were pretty well informed by that conversation on June 20th.
Outfoxed, Nixon disassembled, but with his back against the wall, finally apologized to the nation.
I let the American people down. And I have to carry that burden with me for the rest of my life. My political life is over.
Before we reveal the identity of our top pick, here are some dishonorable mentions.
Okay, I'm being pulled away. You know, we turned down another interview for this.
We don't do crack. We don't do that. Crack is whack.
Direct war.
Yeah. Well, we see that happening.
The other thing is with the terrorists, you have to take out their families. When you get these terrorists, you have to take out their families.
Number 1, Michael Jackson and Martin Bashir.
How do you write a song? How do you write a song?
How do I write a song? Well,
in 2002 and 2003, British journalist Martin Bashir was given unprecedented access to the reclusive king of pop for his film Living with Michael Jackson. It was an interview Jackson would regret. The film included Jackson's claim that his father had been abusive, but also the revelation that Jackson sometimes had sleepovers with children.
I slept on the floor. Was it sleeping bag?
The interview ignited a media and legal firestorm, while Jackson said he felt, quote, utterly betrayed, and U.S. reviewers accused Bashir of using manipulative tactics. New allegations of child molestation divided the public and continue to cast a cloud over Jackson's legacy.
That's not a worrying thing.
Why should it be worrying? Who's the criminal? Who's Jack the Ripper in the room?
Okay, so with that in mind, the main thing I wanted you to see there is how extremely powerful an interview can be, depending on how you conduct the interview, okay? So with that, let's get right into today's. Okay, so we're going to be looking at interview techniques for journalists, talk hosts, and music personalities. Think about the most awkward interviews that you've watched, or interviews where people have gotten really upset, or perhaps have broken down. And then on the other side of it, there are all these really boring interviews that we put off in like 2 minutes because we really just can't listen to it. Interviews are a necessary part of the information gathering process for both news and talk. A powerful interview can make you listen to the radio from beginning to end, whereas a boring one can make you switch off the radio pretty much immediately. Remember, your guests, whether they are rock stars or artists or politicians or experts or specialists in their field or simply regular people with stories to tell, may be nervous when they show up at your radio station. If you're a broadcaster, if you're a presenter, you'll be going on air pretty much daily, and it seems routine for you to switch on the microphone and simply start speaking and talking to thousands of people. However, this experience can be terrifying if you're someone who's never been on air or someone who doesn't go on air often. And your guest might forget what they wanted to say. They can become unsure of where they're heading with the point and become boring, talk endlessly, or say nothing. The purpose of an interview is to get the interviewee to open up and tell you things of interest. You may even get to a point where you get your interviewee to say something that they normally wouldn't discuss on a public forum. You want your guests to share information, to tell stories. A good interviewer knows that in order to get the most out of any interview, the person being interviewed must feel comfortable. Ideally, he or she should forget about the microphone. They should feel heard. If you catch your guest looking at their watch, there's a problem. Because during a good interview, the time flies. And people technically normally like talking about themselves. One of the best things you can do to start your interview off well is to introduce your guest in a compelling way that will excite your audience and make them want to hear what the guest will have to say. Of course, this will benefit you by keeping your listeners waiting for the interview to begin. But your guest, who may be exhausted from a long book tour or anxious about doing a good job on your show, may actually feel inspired to be more candid, to be a better storyteller, because you portrayed them or their work as exciting and interesting. It's up to you as the interviewer to present your guest so that the audience cares about what they will have to say. Grab their attention with powerful storytelling. You want the audience to stick with it, and not to tune out and start thinking about what they will be having for lunch, or wondering about whether they've turned off the washing machine. You are the one who needs to keep things interesting. If the interview heads in a dull direction, grab it and steer the direction elsewhere. For example, I'm sure there are people listening now who fully understand the details of the photosynthesis process, but in layman's terms, could you explain why it's a bad idea to cut down the rainforest? Your audience will appreciate the fact that you're trying to keep your guest from speaking in technical and intricate terms and answers, okay? To kind of, I don't want to say dumb it down, but to bring it back to layman's terms. Often you'll be faced with an uncooperative interviewee, particularly in news situations. So, for example, politicians are notorious for not wanting to tell you anything substantive. Think about when you listen to talk radio and they're interviewing a politician. How often do you hear them giving a straight answer? They have their own agendas and want to use you and your airwaves to promote their ideas. Dealing with this can be quite tricky. There is a way of dealing with this, however, and this technique is called getting it a little bit wrong. So let's say you have a politician who is downplaying the significance of a proposed tax hike. You might say, so your plan means no tax increases for anyone? And the politician will then feel frustrated and misunderstood. People in his profession can't stand that. He might come back with something like, no, my plan would mean a uniform tax increase for almost everyone. And then you've pretty much accomplished several things here. You got him to talk and to explain. You got him to talk and to explain it in a short form and easily understood way, and you've landed the perfect radio interview sound statement. It's short, to the point, and cuts through all the smoke and mirrors your interviewee was trying to use to hide his true agenda. Don't worry about the audience thinking that you're an idiot for misunderstanding your interviewee. If the interview is pre-recorded, you can cut out the dumb question and just air the typed, succinct answer. CNN's former night host, Larry King, is notorious for asking the dumb question. He claims that he doesn't read books of the authors he's interviewing. He also doesn't admit to much in the way of show prep, and his key is to ask the questions members of the audience would ask if they had the chance to sit down and interview the guest. And his audience could comfortably relate to this more casual, relaxed interview style. So this is simply how one individual interviewer, Larry King in this instant, would work. And while it's been effective for him, it should not be construed as an argument against show prep. And I personally really strongly believe in show prep. And the author of your textbook, Valerie Geller, also strongly believes in show prep. Each interviewer and host works differently. That's just the way it is. But the secret to conducting a great interview is the ability to elicit powerful stories and glean new knowledge and information in an interesting way, where you also get to know the person. In most cases, the more relaxed and at home the subject feels, the better it goes. The closer an interview can be to a real live conversation, the better it works. And then another somewhat controversial trick for pre-recorded interviews is that if a guest gets nervous and the answers are too formal or long and boring, wrap up your interview. Leave the recorder running. Hopefully your guest won't notice though. Then say, just to make sure I've got this right, could we go over it one more time? The guest, who will now be relaxed because they think that the interview is over, will often tell you in a very conversational way what the key points were. You can then notice that you left your recorder running and ask permission to use that interview instead of the first formal section. I don't think this is unethical because you're going over the same content that you have been going over with your interviewee. This audio is often much better than the previous audio piece that you recorded, and you're asking their permission for you to use it. Interview subjects are often grateful and will thank you for making them sound so good. So powerful listening, what does that mean? But also for what's not being said. Listening for the silences, for the cracks between the words, the hesitations, the contradictions. In an interview, the star is the topic or the guest, not the host. It helps if you, as the presenter, as the host, can move your ego somewhat to the side and focus completely on what your guest is trying to say. Listening here is key. The interview will go a lot better if the topic is something you care about, as opposed to something you think will be of interest to your audience. Remember, interested is interesting. If you are bored by the topic, odds are that your audience will be too. Listeners can tell the difference between affected and genuine curiosity. Your opening questions will depend on the circumstances. Sometimes it pays to be tough. Other times, kindness, empathy, or humor will serve you best. There's no one right approach to getting a great interview. Part of the skill and the art of the job is to gauge the method needed to get the interviewee to open up and talk. That sense of approach is a skill that you develop by listening. Some stations actually hand out or email a list of helpful hints for guests to read before going on air. I think this is a really good idea. So here are a couple of tips for something that you can include one day. So here, our tips for employees. Firstly, please be available and flexible. If the interview time has to be changed, be gracious. The station may call you in an emergency if another guest has cancelled, or if the station is in need of your expertise right now. Be willing to appear. The host on the station will appreciate and remember you. If you want to make sure you get a copy of the show, have someone record it for you off air. If you're an author, please don't repeat the name of your book or your website over and over. Listeners get annoyed. Your job is to be so fascinating. Your job is to be so fascinating that the listeners stay until the end of the interview because they want to hear what the host, they want to hear the host repeat the title of your book. We will put your information out on the station website if you give it to us in advance. Forget about the larger audience. You will be much more effective if you speak to the host one-on-one instead of addressing all those listeners out there. The audience listens one at a time. Try to relax, be yourself. Radio is personal and intimate. Listeners like to be spoken to that way. Watch your language. You aren't at home and certain expressions might slip out if you're not careful. Keep to the point. If you don't have anything interesting to say, ask the host for another question. Turn off your cell phone. It's quite annoying if you're doing an interview and your cell phone starts ringing. Don't bring lots of notes to studio and read from them. Hosts hate this and it can be boring. Ask for what you need. Do you have your reading glasses? A pen and pencil? Do you need a glass of water? And then do you understand the process? You should feel in control as much as possible. Ask how to use the cough button just in case. Ask the important questions. Can you stop anytime? Is this being recorded or is it live, direct, and anything goes? If the interview is live but via remote, either phone, satellite, studio, or Skype, what is the plan if anything goes wrong? Okay, it's all important questions. By the way, have you eaten? There's nothing more embarrassing than a microphone picking up the growling of your hungry stomach. And then the second last one there, don't be rigid. As in normal conversation, the interview may take a turn that has nothing to do with your agenda. Be a good guest. The discussion may lead to even better things than you were originally prepared to talk about. A skilled interviewer doesn't stick to a script. Lastly, listen to the questions and answer them. If the host seems unprepared or unfamiliar with your topic, don't express anger or frustration. It's not going to help. The audience is probably in the same boat. Just speak to the host as you would to a friendly but uninformed stranger that you meet at a cocktail party or in the next seat on an airplane. If you can genuinely interest the host in your topic, you'll also interest the audience and will have a very good chance of them asking you back. So that was our tips for you to keep in studio one day for your guests, for interviewing guests. Next, we're looking at thoughts for you as a host and an interviewer. Forget the long hello. Keep the introduction and greetings short and to the point. We also mentioned this in the previous class where we said stay away from the long hellos and the greeting cards, okay? There's no reason for all of that. Everyone is fine. We can simply carry on. Listening is the key to successful interviews. Don't stick to a list of questions. Often the best next question will come from the answer to the last one. And then try not to ask yes or no questions. Ask the how and the why questions. Ask how people feel and have them explain things. I'm a very big believer in this, and I constantly ask why. With any answer that I get, I ask why. Okay, I question things. So stick to that instead of the yes or no. If you don't get enough of an answer, don't be afraid to ask again. This is especially important in recorded interviews when you are looking for that perfect soundbite. Curiosity counts. If you are genuinely curious about a subject or a topic, the interview will work. Ask the dumb questions that we spoke about earlier when we spoke about Larry King. Don't be embarrassed if you don't know all the answers. The audience probably doesn't either. That's why you are doing the interview. And then get to the point. Don't clutter up the interview with lots of chit-chat. The audience cares about how what is being said affects their lives. Remember, for them, it's about them. Control the interview. You, as the host, must always be in control of your show. Steer the subject in a better direction if the interview starts getting boring. Don't let slick talking, verbally skilled guests get around you and not answer your question. Ask the questions again and again until you get answers, then move on. Focus on solutions, not only the problems. Even if your guest has some pie-in-the-sky solutions or can offer nothing better than a phone number to call, that's better than ending an interview on some hopeless downward note. Respect responses. Everyone is entitled to an opinion. If he or she is an idiot, that will come through loud and clear all by itself. Lastly end your interviews cleanly. Do a short goodbye. You don't need to recap points made during the interview. Trust that listeners got what was discussed and move on. Because listening is such an important part of creating powerful radio and powerful interviews, it's worth looking at it separately. So let's look at the piece taken from the book by Carl Faber on listening. And this is in your textbook on page 186. So Dr. Carl Faber taught courses on relationships, on myths, men and women. And what we're reading now is an excerpt from his book. Most people have never really been listened to. They live in a lonely silence, no one knowing what they feel, how they live, or what they have done. They are prisoners in the eyes of others, of the stereotyped, limited, superficial, and often distorted ways that others see them. There are no words to adequately describe what it is to be free with another person. It is most often a sensing that someone will let us be all of what we are at that moment. We can talk about whatever we wish, express in any way whatever feelings are in our hearts. We can take as much time as we need. We can sit, stand, pace, yell, cry, pound the floor, dance, or weep for joy. Whatever and however we are at the moment is accepted and respected. This experience of freedom and communion helps us to feel that someone is for us. And it is this deep sensing of someone somewhere being for us that breaks into the silent loneliness of our lives and encourages us in the struggle to be human. It helps us to break the tyranny of the stranger's eyes and to give to our lives all that we are capable of giving. Because listening can bring about such powerful healing. It is one of the most beautiful gifts that people can give and receive. What a beautiful way to end off this class, isn't it? I think that's absolutely stunning and such a nice way of putting it, okay? So take that in, read it again, and see how important listening is. So in summary, Powerful interviews can rivet an audience to the radio. Boring interviews can make the audience disappear. The purpose of an interview is to get the interviewee to open up and reveal information not ordinarily discussed in a public forum on your show. The host must make the guest feel comfortable. Listening is the most powerful tool of an interviewer. The star of the interview is the topic or the guest, not the host. Try not to ask questions that evoke a yes or a no answer. So don't ask questions that start with do and does and are and is, etc. Rather focus on the questions that begin with the who, what, when, where, why, as they evoke a developed answer. And then lastly here, control the interview. Control of the interview is the responsibility of you as the interviewer.